What you picture when you think of Florida in 1958 is not the Florida of 1958. It's an edited version, cleaned up, iron flat. The real version has signs that read "For whites only" at the entrance to the beaches. It has city councils approving demolitions while families were still inside their homes. It has hurricanes that destroyed everything, and developers who arrived before the rubble had cooled. The town you're about to meet existed. It had an address. It had the smell of copper tone in the air, neon signs burning until midnight, and families who believed it would last forever. It didn't. And the reason it didn't last was not time. It was not the weather. It was decisions. Documented decisions. Recorded in city council meeting minutes that still exist in public archives. This begins in the summer of 1958, before anything had changed. In 1940, Florida had 1.9 million residents. By 1960, it had nearly 5 million. No other American state grew that fast in that span. It was not coincidence, and it was not luck. It was a combination of forces that happened only once in American history, and Florida's beaches were at the center of all of it. 2 million soldiers passed through Florida during World War II. They trained here. They saw skies without snow in December, water without cold tides, streets without blackout curtains at 6 in the evening. When the war ended, many came back, not as soldiers, as families. What they found was affordable in a way that would be impossible to imagine today. A week at a beachside motor court ran around $42 in 1958. The equivalent of roughly $440 today, within budget for a teacher, a mechanic, a postal worker. The motor courts had names that sounded like promises: Sea Breeze, Sunset Motor Court, Blue Wave Inn. Built at the turn of the 1940s into the 50s in the style architects called streamline moderne, horizontal lines, arched windows, bands of pink and turquoise neon blinking against the black night sky, kidney-shaped pools, aluminum lounge chairs, the smell of suntan lotion baked into warm concrete that never quite went away. It was a world that seemed built specifically for the expanding American middle class, because it was. The country had just won a war. Industry was at its peak. Wages were rising. Television showed smiling families in big cars driving toward the sun. Florida was the logical destination for that dream. But there was something that dream did not show. The same beaches that sold the image of the family paradise had at their entrances signs with black letters on white backgrounds. For whites only. In 1958 in Florida, that was not a footnote. It was the official architecture of American leisure. Black families who wanted to see the ocean had to find another way. They did, but that comes later. What matters now is this: those motor courts, those neon signs, those kidney-shaped pools did not belong to any outside interest. They were family businesses, run by couples who had taken out loans at the local bank, who knew their guests by name, who swept the parking lot at 6 in the morning before any tourist was awake. They were the ones who had built it, and it was precisely when what they built became too valuable that the outside money started moving in. There was a specific corridor along the Florida coast that developers referred to among themselves as the Strip. It was not an official name. It did not appear on any map. It was the name that circulated in business meetings in New York, Chicago, Detroit, that stretch of land between the Federal Highway and the edge of the Atlantic that, in the early 1950s, was still occupied by 1- and 2-story family motor courts, by permanent trailers, by the homes of fishermen, cheap land with an ocean view. To the people coming in from outside, that was a pricing error that needed to be corrected. The mechanism was simple and documented. Municipal governments in Florida's coastal cities rewrote their zoning codes throughout the 1950s. Not all at once, but gradually, one public hearing at a time. Well-meaning planners, funded by local trade associations, redrew what could be built and where. Older structures that no longer fit the new rules were reclassified as non-conforming uses, legally tolerated as long as the original owner was alive. Transferable, not eligible for renovation, designed to... It was the legal method of erasing a world without tearing anything down with your own hands. And while that was happening in the city chambers, something parallel was moving along the beaches. In Sunny Isles, just north of Miami, more than 30 themed motels, names like Castaways, Dunes, Aztec, and Waikiki, were built along Collins Avenue during the 1950s and 60s. The press called it Motel Row, the most photographed stretch of roadside architecture in Florida. Tourists came from across the country to stay in a motel built to look like a medieval castle or a Polynesian village, 300 yards from the Atlantic. Exactly the kind of place a family on a budget could afford. Exactly the kind of place that did not survive. But there was a layer to this story that the newspapers of the time rarely mentioned. The beaches available to black families were not the same beaches where the neon burned. In 1958, racial segregation on Florida's beaches was not an informal custom. It was enforced by law and by police presence. Virginia Key Beach in Miami was officially designated a colored beach in 1945, the only beach accessible to black residents for miles in any direction. Walking onto a for whites only beach without authorization was grounds for arrest. Black families had built their own world apart. In 1935, 23 years before the summer of 1958, a man named Abraham Lincoln Lewis purchased a stretch of beach on Amelia Island in northeast Florida. Lewis was the first black millionaire in the history of the state. He founded the Afro-American Life Insurance Company, accumulated a fortune, and used part of it to create American Beach, a beachfront community built specifically for black families who had no legal access to any other. American Beach had cottages, it had restaurants, it had live music on weekends. It was a paradise that existed because every other one was closed to them. This is the character who will return later in this story, because what happened to American Beach after segregation ended is one of the most thoroughly documented paradoxes in Florida coastal history. For now, what matters is this. By 1958, the money was already in motion. The developers already had the maps. The city councils already had their pens. And the families, white and black, in their separate motor courts, still believed that summer would last forever. It had about 2 years left. The first upscale condominiums began rising directly on the waterline in the late 1950s, not beside the motor courts, but in their place, after owners sold under pressure from offers that seemed generous at the time. The pattern was always the same. An offer arrived when the owner was behind on a bank loan, when the renovation was too expensive to handle alone, when the new zoning rule had reclassified the motor court as a non-conforming use with no legal future. The offer seemed reasonable on the day of signing. It seemed less reasonable 10 years later, when the land was worth 10 times as much. And then came September 1960. Hurricane Donna formed over the Atlantic on August 29, 1960, and crossed Florida with sustained winds of 100 miles per hour. It caused $300 million in damage in Florida alone, the most costly hurricane to hit the state up to that point. In the Keys, 75% of coastal structures were damaged. On the mainland, 5,200 homes were affected. The older structures, motor courts built without the foundations and reinforcements that newer construction required, took the worst of it. And that is where the mechanism completed itself. Owners with damaged motor courts, without enough insurance to rebuild, without access to credit at local banks, now classified as non-conforming under the new zoning codes, received visits in the weeks after the storm from buyers who arrived with contracts already drawn up. The hurricane did not destroy Florida's beaches. It opened the door for the people who had already been waiting outside. There was a specific meeting that nobody on the beach was watching. It was not secret. It was on the city council's public calendar. It had a recorded transcript. Any citizen could attend. The problem was that it was a Tuesday afternoon in a room without air conditioning in a building 15 miles from the coast, and the families were at the beach. That was how the zoning decisions passed. The process was technical enough to appear neutral and fast enough to avoid organized resistance. A rezoning proposal, from residential to commercial use along a beachfront strip, required an average of 3 public hearings for approval. 3 Tuesdays, 12 weeks. And at the end, a line on a map changed, and with it, the land value doubled overnight, but only for those with capital to build to the new standard. The family motor court owner did not have that capital. Local newspapers published these approvals in the classified section below the real estate listings, not on the front page, not as a headline, in a narrow column in small print that read, "Notice of intent to rezone," followed by legal coordinates that required a lawyer to interpret. The word that appeared in the documents was always progress. Progress meant concrete things. Demolition of older structures, replacement with multi-story buildings, increased lodging capacity per acre, modernization of the city's tourism image, all of that was true. What the documents did not say was who paid the price. The ones who paid were the Morrisons, the Callahans, the Rodriguezes, the family names of the couples who had taken out loans in the 1940s to build those motor courts, who had painted the rooms themselves, who knew the name of every guest who came back every summer. They found out what had been approved when the notification arrived by mail. A formal letter, legal language, 90 days. Some tried to fight it. Those who could afford a lawyer made it to court. Florida's records show that individual property owners rarely prevailed in coastal rezoning disputes against municipalities acting in coordination with developers. The legal structure was built to favor the new use, not the original owner. The numbers were systematically against them. And while that was playing out in the courtrooms, something different was happening at American Beach. Abraham Lincoln Lewis had died in 1947. The community he built was still functioning, but the children and grandchildren of its founders already understood that the world around them was changing. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended the legal segregation of Florida's beaches. What looked like victory had a second face. When the white beaches opened to everyone, the black beaches lost the only reason they had existed as a separate community. Black middle-class residents who had been the captive audience of American Beach now had options. Many left. Tourist traffic declined. Businesses closed one by one. And it was exactly in that moment of vulnerability that developers arrived with offers for American Beach. The irony was perfect and documented. The victory of civil rights economically weakened the only beach community that black families had built for themselves. That was the cost no one had calculated. The hurricane came first. Donna formed over the Atlantic on August 29, 1960, and crossed the Florida coast with sustained winds that reached 145 miles per hour in gusts. It was the most destructive hurricane to strike the state since the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. It caused $300 million in damage across Florida, the equivalent of more than $3 billion in today's dollars. On the southwest coast, structures that had survived 20 hurricane seasons were destroyed in a single night. The pattern of destruction was not random. The oldest buildings, 1- and 2-story family motor courts built in the early 1940s without the construction codes that would be enacted in the years that followed, were the most vulnerable. Roofs torn off, exterior walls collapsing, windows imploding inward. The newer structures, the first apartment buildings and chain hotels built in the second half of the 1950s, survived with minor damage. The hurricane had effectively performed a selection. In the weeks that followed, while owners were assessing what was left, the buyers arrived. These were not corner opportunists. They were representatives of registered development companies with offices in Miami and New York, with contracts already prepared by attorneys. The offer was always structured the same way: immediate cash purchase, at land value, not at the value of the business that had been operating there. The destroyed motor court did not factor into the calculation. Only the square footage. For owners behind on their mortgage, with a family to support, with a business that had stopped functioning on a single September night, the offer seemed reasonable. Many signed. On Lido Key, near Sarasota, the Gulf Beach Resort Motel, opened in 1952, one of the best preserved examples of mid-century modern architecture on the Gulf Coast, survived decades of hurricane seasons. It did not survive the real estate market. It was demolished in 2021 to make way for a luxury condominium after the owners had faced years of pressure from buyers. The pattern that began in 1960 did not stop in 1960. It repeated after Hurricane Betsy in 1965, after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, after Hurricane Ian in 2022. Each storm functioned as an accelerant for the same mechanism: selective destruction of older structures, arrival of outside capital during the window of owner vulnerability, replacement of the original urban fabric with high-end construction inaccessible to the same social class that had built those beaches. Florida's courts processed dozens of post-hurricane sale contests. Most were dismissed. Sunny Isles Motel Row, those 30-some themed motor courts with their exotic names, that neon corridor on Collins Avenue that drew families from across the country, is entirely gone. In place of the Castaways, the Dunes, the Aztec, and the Waikiki, 50-story condominium towers rose. The Castaways was the first to fall in the 1970s. The last ones held on until the 1990s. Today, an apartment in those towers averages $2 million. The family that spent their summer there in 1958 for $42 a week no longer has an address on that beach. There was a woman at American Beach who understood what was happening better than any city council. Her name was Mavi Betch, the great-granddaughter of Abraham Lincoln Lewis, the man who had founded that beach in 1935 so that black families could see the ocean without humiliation. Mavi was not an architect. She was not a lawyer. She was a soprano. She had studied classical voice in Germany, performed on stages across Europe, built a career in a world her great-grandfather had never been permitted to enter. In 1975, she walked away from all of it. She returned to American Beach, sold her belongings, donated the money to environmental causes, and lived on a minimal monthly income, walking the beach every day with fingernails grown into long spirals and natural hair that had not been cut in decades. The press called her eccentric. The residents called her the beach lady. She spent her days talking to tourists, to journalists, to anyone willing to listen to the history of that place. And there was one specific story she told with surgical precision. When the Civil Rights Act of 1964 opened the beaches, developers identified American Beach as vulnerable ground. The community had been built as an enclave of necessity, necessary while everything else was closed. With the beaches open, the economic cohesion holding that place together began to dissolve. Businesses closed, vacation homes were sold, and buyers arrived with offers that seemed reasonable on the day of signing. Same mechanism, same pattern. Except here the instrument had not been a hurricane. It had been the civil rights victory itself. Mavi fought for 30 years. She sued developers. She blocked construction approvals. She showed up at public hearings with handwritten case files. In 2002, American Beach was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, 67 structures, approximately 40 acres, on the southern end of Amelia Island, near Fernandina Beach. It was a formal victory. It protected what had survived. Mavi died 3 years later on September 5, 2005, of cancer. Before she died, she asked that her ashes be scattered on the sand at American Beach. They were. The paradox she spent her entire life trying to explain was simple and devastating. The same black families who had been expelled from white beaches by segregation were, after segregation ended, expelled from the only beach they had ever built for themselves, this time by real estate speculation. The mechanism changed. The result was the same. The white beaches that expelled families by race in 1958 now expel families by income in 2026. American Beach survived, in part, because one woman decided that place was worth the rest of her life. The Castaways, the Dunes, the Blue Wave Inns had no Mavi. They did not survive. The Florida of 1958 no longer exists as a coherent physical place, but it exists as a document. The State Archives of Florida in Tallahassee maintains the Florida Photographic Collection, more than 1 million images of the state, with over 200,000 photographs digitized and available online through the Florida Memory Program. The photos of the neon motor courts are there, the big cars in the gravel parking lots, the families at the edge of the kidney-shaped pool. The smell of Coppertone is not there, but everything that could be photographed is. American Beach exists. It can be visited today. It sits on the southern end of Amelia Island, 40 minutes north of Jacksonville along Highway A1A. In 2024, the National Park Service initiated a review to designate American Beach as a National Historic Landmark, a level of protection beyond its current listing. That decision is still in process, but the effort is documented and public. The yellow house where Mavi Betch died still stands on Ocean Boulevard. On other Florida beaches, the physical traces are subtler. Some streets and coastal cities still carry the names of the original motor courts. The name Castaways appears on a highway exit in Sunny Isles, not as a planned memorial, but as an administrative remnant no one updated when the towers went up. What remains of the Florida of 1958 is not on the beaches. It is in the archives, in the city council meeting minutes still filed in county courthouses, in the photographs on the Florida Memory Program, and in the sand on a barrier island north of Jacksonville, where the ashes of a woman who refused to forget mixed with the sea. The sea did not take American Beach, but it took almost everything else.